I'm Joel Friedlander from thebookdesigner.com. I'd like to welcome you to another session of Q&A with the Book Designer, where I answer your questions. This week's question is, who owns my book? Now that might seem like a kind of a strange question to you because, after all, you wrote the book, you own the book. And that is certainly true, and nothing I say is going to change that. What I'm talking about is who owns the reproduction files from which your book is printed. For instance, suppose you've decided you don't really want to do all that work of being a self-publisher yourself, and you've signed up with one of the many subsidy publishers. That's where you pay and they publish your book. Now, the fact is that they have very long and complex contracts, and that puts a lot of people off from actually reading the contract. But I want to encourage you to dive into that contract. If that's you and you're thinking of signing up with one of these many subsidy publishers, find out who owns your book. Now here's a fact of life that you have to know. If you sign a contract with a subsidy publisher or even a book designer or a book producer like me, you have to find out for yourself who's going to own the files that are created in the process at the end. Legally, under most contracts, you maintain ownership of the book, but what you're buying is actually the finished books. That doesn't include all the files or other work that was done in preparation to print the books. So at the end of the project, you actually may have no rights to the files that were created to print your book, even though you paid for them. Now, I talked to an author this week who was in this situation, and even though she had paid a very high price, I might say, to get her book done, much too high, according to my thinking, that company is now asking her to pay them $700 just to get the files that she already paid for. In another case, a few months ago, I had another author who had published with one of these same companies. You can probably tell I don't like them very much. And he requested the files back because he wanted to revise the book and go to a different publisher. And they sent him all the files, but every page had a big watermark on it with their name behind the type. These files were unusable for reproduction. Then we requested the files for the cover. And sure enough, they sent us the file for the cover, but all they were willing to do was send us a low-resolution proof. This proof could not be used to print new covers. We had to start all over again. So here's my message for today. If you're buying services, whether it's from an independent operator, a self-employed person like me, and I design books for people, and I always operate on a contract, or if you're thinking about going to a publisher, whether they seem to be have your self-interest in mind or not, you have to make sure you know who owns those files. And here are my tips. In my contract, I state categorically that at the end of the project, when the last invoice is paid, I turn over ownership of all the files to the author. And I think because I'm an author, that's the way it should be. You paid for them. I'm going to give them to you. After all, they're no use to me. They're only of use to you. So my advice is check your contract very carefully. And here's what I think you should do. I think you should make sure that included in the contract is language that says that you own all the materials as soon as the final check is written for the job, whatever job you hired the person or the company for. Look, if you're working with a book designer, make sure that at the end of the project, when you're about to write that last check, that you get the files and don't hesitate to ask for them, and don't put it off. Get them right away at the end of the project. There's never going to be a better time for you to get those files than right then. If you wait 6 months or a year, you may be out of luck, and it's very expensive to recreate them, to start over from scratch. Nobody wants to do that, do they? And if you're thinking of using a big subsidy publisher, think again. There are better solutions out there, but if that's the choice that you make, just make sure that you're well informed about getting your files back, and if the company you're dealing with is unwilling to give you those files at the end of the job, maybe you should think again about what you're doing. Anyway, this is a little tip. It can create a lot of hardship for people at the end of their project. Everybody wants to feel good going in, but experience tells us that at the end of the project, that's the best time to evaluate whether you were happy with the service or the product that you bought. Take a tip from the book designer. Make sure this language is very clear, that you have a clear understanding with either the individual or the company you're dealing with, that you want to own those files and you want to take delivery of them right immediately at the end of the project. Tune in next week on Saturday and I'll have another Q&A with the book designer for you. And if you have a question you'd like to ask, put it down in the comments under this video and I'll try to get to it next week. Until then, publish some great books.